Hi, everyone. We're going to go over the last section of chapter 2 when we talk about the kind of biological aspects of behavior, mental processes. We've talked about the nervous system, we've talked about the brain, we've talked about the endocrine system. And so now we are going to talk about genetics in general and how our genes, how our heredity influences our behavior and how we study that a little bit. So heredity is basically the transmission of characteristics from parents to offspring, which I'm sure you probably know. There's a lot about this that is just review from biology class. And so I'm not going to get really deeply into what genetics is in itself. We know that genes are found in chromosomes. 23 chromosomes is equal to a gamete. A gamete is a sperm or an ova. When you take a sperm and an ova, you put them together, you get a zygote. Zygote is equal to 46 chromosomes, which is 23 pair. And the genes that are on those chromosomes determine what our different characteristics are going to be. Now, we're not going to get into necessarily dominant genes and recessive genes again. I think it's stuff that you have gone over before in biology class, but it's important to know that it's not just physical characteristics that are passed on through chromosomes. There are also characteristics such as personality, intelligence. These things are influenced by genes as well. It really does have an influence on our lives psychologically. And so we need to look at that a little bit. It also lends itself to the conversation of nature versus nurture. So are we who we are because of what we inherit from our parents, or are we who we are because of the environment in which we were raised? This has been a debate for years and years and years since the beginning of the discovery of genetics. And the truth is probably both. And we'll get into that in just a minute. But we need to start the discussion with understanding how it is we study genetics. So there are 3 basic ways that we're studying genetics. The first type is through molecular genetics. This is using technology to manipulate genes and then determining their effect on behavior. So really pinpointing in our DNA what particular genes control what aspects of life in general, health, well-being, personality, things like that. And to some degree, that's really being developed and studied so that we can learn more about that. So that if someone does possibly have a certain disorder, you might be able to determine that they have an abnormality in a particular gene. The second type is selective breeding. Now, think of selective breeding more in the mindset of animals rather than humans, because it's not something that we want to do in humans. But selective breeding is when organisms are chosen for reproduction based on how much of a particular trait they display. So this could also be in plants. We've been able to create animals, for example, that have certain traits. So think about cattle. You're going to take cattle that have the traits that you are looking for, and you're going to breed them with other cattle that have those same traits. That's selective breeding. I have a golden doodle. I got a picture on here of him. That's Jake. He is a golden doodle. He has been selectively bred. He is a golden retriever mixed with a poodle. And so he has the personality of a golden retriever, which is a very sweet, affectionate companion dog, with a poodle who is hypoallergenic and has curly hair, so he doesn't shed very much. So that's why golden doodles were made. And so I'm able to have a hypoallergenic dog in my house when I have family members that have a lot of allergies. So selective breeding is another way that we can study genetics and see how we can build certain genes in organisms. So, you know, some experiments have been like rats. Rats that were really good at mazes were bred with other rats that were really good at mazes, and rats that were terrible and were slow bred with other rats that were terrible and slow, and then kind of pitted against each other just to see if those traits were genetic or not. The last one is behavior genetics, and this is the study of the degree and nature of heredity's influence on behavior. So how much does heredity influence us versus the environment we live in? And this is done primarily through twin studies or kinship studies. So what they will look at is, for example, identical twins, they have 100% of the same DNA. And so we can look at twins who were possibly reared separately, but have identical DNA, and we can see how they are similar and how they are different. So what things in their lives were influenced by the environment they lived in, and what aspects of their lives were influenced just by genetics. So, you know, obviously, if they're identical twins, they're going to look the same. But are they going to have similar jobs? Are they going to have similar personalities? Things like that. Brothers, sisters, parents, and their kids, they have a 50% commonality in their genetics. This would include fraternal twins, because fraternal twins have DNA that are similar to a brother and sister or siblings in some ways. So you can look at that too. What similarities do you have with your parents? What similarities do you have with your siblings? And how much of that is because you were living in the same environment, and how much of it is because that's just what was, you know, genetically programmed into you. Aunts and uncles have 25% similar genetics as their nieces and nephews, and first cousins have 12.5% similarity. So think about that. Think about those people that you maybe have some things in common with, and you know, what of that is genetic and what of that is environment. So what are some of the most effective studies? Twin studies found that there were heredity links to shyness, to irritability, to sociability, to autism, to substance dependence, to schizophrenia. So if you have a family member that's an alcoholic, close family member with some of those common DNA percentages, you have that percentage of a chance that you may also have that substance dependence. So you might also have alcoholism or whatever that might be. Schizophrenia is another one. We're going to talk about that later on. If you have schizophrenia, if you have a parent that's schizophrenic, there is a high probability that you could also become schizophrenic. Not 100%, but a high probability. We have found adoptee studies that can rule out environmental factors. So a child who might be adopted could look at similarities to a parent that they didn't live with, that they didn't grow up with. So you have a parent that maybe is an alcoholic, and a child is born and adopted into a different family where there is no alcoholism, and that child becomes an alcoholic. You could make connections that that is a heredity factor rather than an environmental factor. And then twins reared apart. They found mannerisms, intelligence, aggression, leadership, all of these things they found to possibly be hereditary. Sorry, I'm getting a little crazy with my slides here. So here, an example from the book, they talk about a pair of twins, Jim Springer and Jim Lewis, who were separated at 4 weeks of age, did not see each other again until they were 39 years old. They had an uncanny number of similarities, even though they had lived apart for decades. For example, they both worked as part-time deputy sheriffs. They both had vacationed in Florida. They had owned Chevrolets, had dogs named Toy, and had married and divorced women named Betty. Both liked math, but not spelling. Both were good at mechanical drawing. Both put on 10 pounds at about the same time in their lives, and both started suffering headaches at age 18. They did have some differences. One was better at speaking, the other one was better at writing, and one parted his hair over his forehead while the other wore his slicked back with sideburns. So, you know, it's interesting to see what commonalities those people happen to have, and what we can link to environment and what we can link to heredity. So genes are huge. They're a huge part of why we become the people that we become. But it is also important to consider environment. And so that's where we start looking at genotype and phenotype. Yesterday, we discussed how the pituitary gland had to do with growth. And if there were issues with that pituitary gland, it could stunt your growth. And I talked about a student that I'd had that had taken medication, and that it affected that, and he did not grow at the same rate that his friends did because of that. So that is an environmental factor on one of his traits. So a lot of times our height is based on the height of our parents, and you know, we can make that connection. But when you have an outside environmental influence that changes what your genes have decided for you, we divide those out by genotype and phenotype. So genotype would be a person's genetic heritage. So that for this particular person would be maybe that their genes say you're going to be a tall person. Their phenotype is that they're not a tall person because they had environmental influences. So phenotype is their observable characteristic, genotype is their genetic heritage. I can simplify that for you a little bit. Let's look at hair color. There are people who have a genotype, or their genetic hair color is, let's say, brunette, but they color their hair blonde. And so their phenotype is blonde because that's what's observable. That's what we can see. We can see that they're blonde, but that's not really what their genetic heritage is. Their genetic heritage is that they're a brunette. So you can see some differences there. Phenotypes can be physical or psychological characteristics. I personally, just an example, I am a very introverted person. That is my genotype. I believe that is a personality trait that is just within my genes. My dad is also an introvert. You know, I can trace that back to family members. However, people that have been in class with me maybe don't see that because that's part of my job. But the environment makes it so that I have to talk to people. I have to be around people. I have to be sociable. And so that's the phenotype, is that maybe I'm a little bit more outgoing than what my genetics have determined for me. So that is kind of the notes or the discussion for today. And then you have an assignment that I would like you to please complete for Monday. So if you go into Classroom, you're going to see that there's a document already made for you. Everybody gets their own, and you just have to respond to the reflection question, which is asking you about commonalities between yourself and your siblings. Now, I didn't check to see that everybody in class has siblings. If you don't have siblings, you can go ahead and do that with your parents or other family members, a cousin or something like that, and that would work too. And then there are also a couple of videos that we're going to be watching in class that talk about twin studies and studies of twins that were separated at birth. So being able to see what similarities they had, which is kind of interesting too. So other than that, we'll see you on next week. Monday, we're going to be doing a review, and Tuesday we will have the test. So as always, let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, I will see you soon.